Okay, hello there, everybody, and good evening, and welcome to the Long Island Immigration Clinic's first ever event. We're so excited to have all of you here this evening. There are currently over 3 million immigrants awaiting deportation hearings as the media continues to air disturbing images of desperate immigrants trying to cross the US-Mexican border. Is there a crisis at the border, or is it more a crisis in America's broken immigration laws and policies? Tonight, you will learn about how asylum and refugee law impact immigrant communities across Long Island and hear from advocates who have either done or are doing the work to ensure equitable futures for undocumented immigrants. Tonight's panel, titled Crisis at the Border, Long Island Implications of Asylum and Refugee Law, was organized by Sister Janet Kinney, Director of LIIC, Richard Kubek, the Community Outreach Coordinator of Long Island Jobs with Justice, who is also a member of the LIIC Advisory Board, and myself, Dina Spanos, the Program Coordinator of LIIC. I would like to begin tonight with a land acknowledgement. We want to acknowledge that we gather on the traditional land of the Secretog peoples, both past and present, and honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who have stewarded it throughout generations. Algonquin Indians inhabited Long Island for centuries, and the Secretog tribe occupied all of the area in the town of Islip, including the Sisters of St. Joseph campus where we are based. We must continue to acknowledge and support our Indigenous communities by committing to educating ourselves and one another and taking action to ensure equitability, inclusion, honor, and respect for the people of this land. We take a moment now to reflect. Thank you all, and let me pass the mic, so to speak, over to the Long Island Immigration Clinic's Director, Sister Janet Kinney.
Thank you, Dina. And good evening, and thank you so much for joining us. I begin by sharing my great gratitude for all the work that has been put into making both this clinic and tonight's event a reality. And a special thank you to you, Dina, who is moderating and the technical wizard behind this event. Just over a year ago, 9 Long Island organizations and congregations, and I need to name them, to include the Long Island Episcopal Diocese, Long Island Jobs with Justice, SEPA Mujer, Empire Justice Center, North Brookhaven Sanctuary Cluster, Huntington Rapid Response Network, the Sisters of St. Dominic, YAM Community Resource, Inc., and the Sisters of St. Joseph, who are the clinic's fiduciary sponsor, came together to address the critical need of our immigrant friends who are undocumented and don't have access to legal assistance with their asylum cases. Through their collective hard work, here we are today, soon to open our clinic doors. Our mission is to assist our immigrant friends who otherwise would have no support in filing their immigration paperwork, which, if you know anything about the immigration system, is a daunting task, particularly when English is not your first language. We are committed to being a welcoming presence to all who enter our doors, and as we continue to grow, we envision creating a supportive community that will surround our friends and provide them a safe and confidential space to get connected with whatever services they might need. While our doors are not officially yet open, we're aiming to launch in early 2022. But do be on the lookout for more educational programming, and some which will be multilingual, and further updates. And if you're interested in volunteering, do check out our new website and fill out the online form. And that address is going to be also put in the chat function, and you'll be getting it in an email tomorrow. And not to worry, training will be provided. But let us begin. And first, we want to share with you this short video clip just to give you a glimpse of our beautiful space.
Hello, welcome, bienvenidos, aquí to the Long Island Immigration Clinic. Come on in. Here you can see some of our wonderful art from Mexico and Guatemala and El Salvador and Honduras. We have faces from the Dominican Republic, and we have wonderful, wonderful art from Haiti. As you make your way down the hallway, we have some images of some cultural and traditional norms. And we have our banner that says welcome in many different languages because all are welcome here. Let's make our way into the clinic. Here is our beautiful clinic space that we cannot wait to fill with volunteers and our immigrant friends to help them with asylum paperwork. And we hope that you'll join us.
Looking forward to you joining us here at Long Island Immigration Clinic.
Okay, just switch over. Okay, so tonight we are joined by a wonderful lineup of speakers who all hold different experiences with asylum and immigration law. We will open up with some words from Patrick Young, the Downstate Advocacy Director of New York Immigration Coalition and Special Professor of Immigration Law at Hofstra University School of Law. We will then transition into a panel discussion with Marthe Saint Cyr, an active board member of YAM Community Resource, Inc., advisor to the Haitian Women's Collective, and formerly a deputy commissioner for the UN Commission on Human Rights, as well as the executive director of Lambie Fund of Haiti. Sister Eileen McCann, a sister of St. Joseph and a retired immigration attorney who has worked for 4+ decades in advocacy and service to immigrant communities. Sister Eileen was an attorney for the Legal Aid Society, and she is now assisting LIIC using her vast legal experience in immigration law. And finally, Angel Reyes Rivas, who is the Long Island coordinator for Rural and Migrant Ministry. Please save your questions for the end of the event, as we have allotted time for a brief Q&A through the chat function on your screen. With that, I pass the mic over to our first speaker, Patrick Young.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Great, thank you. You know, many years ago, I gave a lecture on the development of asylum law, and I referred to modern refugees as the children of Anne Frank, because refugee law really grew out of the failure of the Western democracies during the Spanish Civil War, when refugees fleeing Franco were actually cut off by the French army as they were trying to climb over the Pyrenees into France, and by countries like the United States during World War II, which denied entry to vast numbers of people who were fleeing persecution, but particularly to Jews who were being exterminated in Nazi Germany and in the lands that fell under the Nazis. So in the 1940s, we see the democracies trying through the United Nations, through the Geneva Convention, to develop some type of law that would not allow this to happen again. And so as early as 1951, we see a Geneva Convention relating to refugees that's put into place. And then in 1967, we have a United Nations protocol relating to refugees, which the United States was a party to. We helped to design it, but we didn't actually try to implement it until 1980. And even though it then became part of the law of the land in 1980, we found that some really disturbing discriminatory trends came in. So we saw folks who were coming here from the Soviet Union, which then still existed, would be typically granted refuge in the United States, but folks who were similarly endangered who were coming from Haiti were denied admission into this country. We begin to see changes in that in the early 1990s. There's a big lawsuit that I was party to called American Baptist Churches versus Ed Meese. Ed Meese was Ronald Reagan's attorney general, which exposed massive discrimination in asylum adjudications against people who are coming from El Salvador and Guatemala, while about 90% of refugees coming from Nicaragua, which the U.S. was antagonistic towards, were granted refugee status. 99% of Guatemalans who are actually fleeing what was later identified as one of the worst genocides in the Western Hemisphere by the United Nations Truth Commission, over 99% of them were denied political asylum. And the only thing that really seemed to stand in their way was the fact that the United States supported the government of Guatemala, even though it was not a democratic government and it was both authoritarian and brutal in its treatment of its people. We did see changes beginning in the 1990s, and the changes were generally good changes. They were brought about through court orders because the U.S. government could not even defend the really horrific discrimination that had taken place against Haitians and Salvadorans, Guatemalans, and other peoples from the Western Hemisphere who were facing persecution. We saw the beginning of a professional political asylum corps in this country, decoupling some of the politics from the asylum adjudications. These were all really important changes, and they were changes that were frankly won because people like you fought for them. It wasn't just the lawyers who brought these cases. The big case that changed almost everything was called American Baptist Church, and that was really founded around an alliance of different religious institutions, not just the Baptists, but different religious institutions around the country that said that this is immoral and this can't stand. So we did see a lot of improvements, and then I would say that following during the Bush administration beginning in 2002, we start to see some regression. We start to see increased attempts to deny the right to seek asylum. We see that loosen up during the Obama administration until 2014, when we begin to see the influx of unaccompanied children who were fleeing, largely gang activities in their home countries in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. And more recently, with the Trump administration, the attempt to almost entirely cut off political asylum. Folks should probably know that refugee admissions, which had been running 90 to 100,000 per year, were dropped down to 10,000 or so per year, and that asylum adjudications were largely cut off. Folks are aware that there was many problems that led to backups at the border of people who were seeking asylum, something called metering, which meant that only a small number of people would be allowed to apply for asylum, something called the Remain in Mexico policy, that people who were applying for asylum could not enter the United States while the application was being adjudicated. And I know that a lot of folks have said to me, well, why are they coming to the border to apply? I mean, this doesn't make any sense. They should do this in their home country. And obviously they must be somehow evading the law when they show up at the border. That's not right. But in fact, for almost all people seeking asylum in the United States who are coming from the Western Hemisphere, the only legal way to apply for asylum is to apply at the border. There was a brief attempt by the Obama administration to create a system where Central Americans with children, with family members in the United States, would be able to apply for asylum in their home countries, which makes a lot of sense. You don't want children to risk coming in an irregular way into the United States in order to try to seek asylum. But, in fact, that was ended when the Trump administration was inaugurated in March of 2017. So, a very small and new program that had a lot of promise was not even allowed to go forward. And so the only way that they could apply for asylum was to actually come to the United States. So the scenes that you see at the border are ones that were designed into the system. the system was designed in order to make that the only way in which people could seek asylum. And we see this unfortunately carrying over into the Biden administration. The Biden administration has improved the adjudication, the judging of asylum cases, both in the immigration court and also in the asylum offices. But we are also seeing attempts to keep people from even being able to apply for asylum. And I think that, it was particularly disturbing just a couple of months ago when we saw asylum seekers coming up to the border being whipped by Border Patrol agents on horseback. I think that the images of the largely Haitian refugees that were shown were really disturbing to a lot of us. But we should be even more disturbed, not just by these photographic images, but by the reports that we're seeing. One of the things that we know is that Human Rights Watch this week released a report in which they had 160 different reports over the last 4 years from asylum officers, in which asylum officers were filing complaints against Border Patrol agents. Now, the asylum officers work for the Department of Homeland Security. They're not advocates, but they do interview asylum seekers, and they found things like an asylum seeker from Honduras who was told that if he applied for asylum, he'd be put into jail and raped in jail. So, there's been an active effort by the Border Patrol, by the agents, to discourage asylum seekers from even applying for asylum. There is also, just this week, a report in the New York Times on Border Patrol agents who created a Facebook group that was exposed last year when Border Patrol agents posted racist memes about the asylum seekers that they were encountering. And, we all remember the horrible case of a Honduran man found drowned with his child in the Rio Grande. They were actually claiming that was fake news that was invented by the media, that it had actually never happened, that nobody had died that way. And out of 60 who were involved in this group, only 2 of them have faced discipline. So, we're unfortunately seeing a regression in the area of political asylum law, something that we had hoped would be cured by the Biden administration, and perhaps over time it will be, but certainly it's still actively problematic now. We should understand that in the immigration field, somebody who is not charged with any crime can be thrown into jail, sometimes for years. One of the most notorious cases was a young woman named Kasinga, who was fleeing female genital mutilation in Africa, came to the United States and was placed in jail for 2 years. Even though she had won her case in immigration court, she was kept in jail while the appeal was pending, and the appeals can take many months to go through the system. So we have a system where you can be locked up, and you would, of course, think that if you could be arrested and thrown into jail, you'd have a right to an attorney. But in fact, you only have a right to an attorney if you can afford to pay for that attorney. So roughly 60% of people who are applying for asylum do not get to see an attorney. They represent themselves. And incredibly, that includes children. You would again think that asylum seekers, people who might be locked up in jail while they're waiting for their cases to be heard, should have a right to an attorney. But certainly a child who's applying for asylum should have a right to an attorney. But if you want to understand the mindset within the immigration courts in 2016 in a lawsuit to try to require attorneys that were court appointed for these children, Judge Jack Wild, who was at the time a very important judge because he was actually in charge of the training of all new judges, said that even a 3-year-old could represent him or herself. He said, I've tried 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds in immigration. I've trained 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds in immigration law, and you can do a fair hearing even with a child. So, that is the kind of delusion that we see within the government, and it's something that really has to be challenged through the representation of immigrants who are facing deportation, particularly those who might be deported back into a situation where they'd be persecuted. You know, a 4-year-old could represent themselves 24 years from now after they finish college and law school. But when they're 4 years old, they're learning to color. They're not learning immigration law. So I want to thank everybody who showed up tonight. And I know we have a great panel coming up after me. And I'll stick around in case anyone has any questions later. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pat. Thank you. Okay. Thank you again for your insight, Pat. And we're looking forward to hearing more from you in our panel later on. So we are going to transition over into our panel portion. Each speaker will have 2 minutes to answer. To our attendees, please add any questions you might have in the chat box, and we will try to address them during our Q&A at the end. We should have a few minutes to do so. So now I'm going to open up with our first panel question, and this I'm going to ask Marie to answer first, followed by Angel. So how is current asylum and refugee law impacting the Long Island immigrant community that you serve? Oh, Marie, you're muted.
I'm sorry. I think it's incumbent upon each and every Haitian family to really assess the situation because it's impacting them personally, emotionally, and in their relationship with home. As I listen to Pat, I concur with all that has been saying in terms of showing the complexity of the history. But for Haitians, the complexity is we living it every day as we contemplate the relationship that the United States has with the governments that are derelict in their duties to take care of the Haitian people, and continuous administration after administration, not asking them for accountability for taxpayers' money that we send to Haiti, and we know it's not being used to care for the Haitian people. We, with the social media, we are raw, looking at the brunt of what's happening in our country, not only politically, but if we say that it is a humanitarian crisis, it is clearly that we're not being handled as human beings by the United States. Though we have a relationship geographically well established, but politically negatively for Haiti. So it is difficult when you see 3 generations of Haitians sitting right here in this living room, crying when they see the news of Haitians being lynched practically being lynched during this crisis. It brought home this on an everyday basis. And if you look at the remittance that Haitians sent to Haiti, $3.8 billion, you realize also that we continuously are trying to be responsible to take care of our own. It is very difficult to live every day within this enclosure where you see global diversity denied every single day, and inclusion is not for the Haitian people. So it is affecting us through the social media, it's affecting us in our everyday life, and the insecurity in Haiti is so enormous that we are existing in suspense of the next call from your country. So there is a large impact as we have a community growing in Long Island.
Thank you so much, Marie. Thank you for that. Angel?
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me, and congratulations to the people of the clinic for making this happen. It's certainly needed. I always say that, I mean, maybe there's not a lack of attorneys, immigration attorneys on Long Island, but there's certainly a lack of honest immigration attorneys on Long Island. So I am the Long Island coordinator for Rural and Immigrant Ministry. I am not an attorney, so my opinion on asylum law and any type of law is limited, and it's mainly based on my contact with the community and some of the cases that, you know, I've worked with people as an organizer, and some of the also accounts of being connected to some lawyers and attorneys that, you know, try to do good work. So, you know, I started as an organizer back in, you know, late 2015, early 2016, perfect timing, right? And I think we can all agree that the Trump administration's anti-immigrant efforts made long-lasting damages to our current immigration system. For the ones that know me here, I'm not a big, I wasn't a big fan of Trump and his administration, right? And I can say that, the changes, right? When it comes to the people that, I work with going through asylum cases, it certainly narrowed the grounds upon which asylum can be claimed. That certainly affected immigrants that had settled here on Long Island in the US for many years, and even worse, people waiting outside the US, they had pretty much no chance or hope. I remember that, on day one, when Trump got elected and he started, the first thing that he did, I remember that there was an executive order that changed the prosecutorial discretion, and everyone became deportation priority. People that know my work and know me, they know that, my family went through a deportation. My mom was deported when I was in high school, and that, really brought me close to this issue and really pushed me to advocate and really fight for immigrant families and really push back against deportations, right? But the Trump years were horrible, and even when COVID came, I think to make matters worse, Trump immediately jumped on the opportunity to employ Title 42, and he just started denying people their right to a court hearing. And even those currently waiting for asylum, they couldn't even appeal the decision, right? It was convenient. So, it is easy for people to think that just because we have a new administration, that, a more compassionate administration, I would say, that all these issues are suddenly gone, but they're not, right? That, like what Pat said, right? And even though I have, high hopes that Biden will undo much of the damage done, the amount of damage that must be undone is extremely difficult to conceptualize. But we, gotta stay strong, and we gotta come together and really push against all of those injustices.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Angel, for that. Thank you both. Those were really wonderful responses. This next question is for Sister Eileen. So there are a set of factors that asylum seekers must demonstrate to qualify for asylum. What might constitute past persecution or credible fear for asylum seekers today? And has it changed since past decades?
I think that, there are very definite criteria that an asylum seeker must show. They have to show a well-founded fear of persecution, and that persecution has to be on account of race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group or political opinion, or they have to show that they experienced such persecution in the past. So the persecution, for example, in the past could be that somebody is working in, let's say, El Salvador, and is working to try to unionize workers in a big multinational corporation like Pepsi-Cola, and is pursued by the security of the Pepsi-Cola company, but he knows that those same security people are also working for the local police. And so they go, they'll beat him up, and they'll give him a death threat. So he leaves the country. He's already been beat up, he suffered persecution. Now, naturally, that kind of thing would lead somebody else who was in his position to, and that would be clearly because of his membership in a union organization and his opinion that workers have a right to a decent living. And a current person who is in that work could show a credible subjective and objective fear of persecution because of he's in the same position, and he already knows that somebody else received death threats and perhaps worked with this person or whatever. It's a very, very difficult thing. And as Pat was saying before, the level of accepting claims by people is not very high at all from the particular countries that the people are coming from on our southern border. For me, what I have seen change is that when I did this work in the 80s, it was clearer. The United States was definitely supporting the militaries in Guatemala and in El Salvador, particularly, and repressive governments that were there. So it was they were being trained in the School of the Americas in Columbus, Georgia, to how to persecute people who were looking for their rights or looking for any kind of rights at all. Farmers, students, union organizers, everybody. I think the situation now in the Northern Triangle particularly is a lot harder because you have a total breakdown of governance and you have gangs that are basically controlling neighborhoods. So it's harder for people to get documentation regarding their cases. And I think they're living in failed governments, and it's tragic. It's just a terrible thing.
Yeah,
I'll leave
absolutely.
it at that, Gina. Yeah.
Thank you, Sister Eileen. Thank you. So this next question is for Angel and Marie again. I'm going to start off with you, Angel. What are some current advocacy efforts for asylees and refugees happening on Long Island and beyond?
I mean, I think the most important one, is, a pathway to citizenship, right? That would really solve a lot of the problems currently with the system, and, immigration reform does not necessarily mean just citizenship, right? I mean, it also means with, amending some of these laws, asylum laws, and also investing into like a better court system, right? And demilitarizing the border and immigration, enforcement, right? I think all of those things are necessary. Also doing away with Title 42, which is just an archaic, law. It's really important right now as we are currently struggling with COVID, and that's a major component of the immigration situation at the border, right? I mean, I believe that Biden has taken some measures to fix things, but also has failed in many other regards, right? And I mean, for example, he reinstated prosecutorial discretion authority, which means that people can, with pending cases, will be allowed to remain in the country. I mean, but he has failed to reinstate rules on like getting, work authorization, so a lot of those like back laws, they are getting worse, which means that as time goes on, people might, who probably has a chance to win cases, might lose some evidence, or, circumstances change, or like they forget, important details, right? So it is important that those things, and I mean, also the Biden administration is continuing to use Title 42, as I said, despite evidence that it's ineffective as a public health tool. So, I mean, I would honestly say, if we can at least get started with some of these basic changes that, are not only historical, but also like recent, as the Trump administration did a lot of those things that we're currently, that currently affect the immigrant community and the people coming, to look for asylum.
Absolutely. Thank you so much again, Angel. Marie?
I will not repeat all the things that Angel has said, but I think that the community education is a critical component for them to begin really to understand how complex the process is, and also dealing with their own fear. When you don't have a support, and most Haitians that I have met going to this, we've done translation, we've gone to court with them, accompany them, they don't have the capacity to hire a lawyer to sustain the long process and to respond appropriately with documents that they are sought, as Sister pointed out, that it's difficult to get and to leave the country when you are being pursued. So I think educating the community is a critical element. A second one is that I see during this period a lot of groups trying to advocate. The advocacy belongs in the Hill of Washington because the law has to change, policies and processes has to be readjusted so that we can see change. But I think that there is a lot of despair at this point, and a center like yours coming for Long Island would be a huge relief, because people don't know where to turn. They have to go to the city sometime and they don't know, they cannot manage, they don't know the system. It's very hard to navigate this system, if you can navigate it at all.
Absolutely. Awesome input. Okay, this next question is for you, Angel. From your perspective, how is the crisis at the border impacting asylum cases on Long Island?
So I think for those of us here, cases may take years to litigate, and that impacts the chances of actually being granted relief, right? I think for those of us with families who have recently arrived, their cases might be complicated or they may not apply, for relief. I mean, they may not be able to exert their legal right to begin with, right? For those of us with family or friends who wish to come, increasing enforcement pushes people to make more dangerous crossings, subjecting themselves to the risk of being exploited, becoming victims of crime, rape, suffering death, and also like severe bodily injury while trying to cross. And I mean, as we have seen an influx of unaccompanied minors coming this recent year. I think, Suffolk County was placed as the fourth, county with the most accompanied minors coming in. I think, the Office of, Refugee Resettlement said that on the reports that go from October to August show that there has been a little bit over 1,500, children coming to Suffolk County, and I think like 1,000 coming to Nassau County. So I mean, I would say for the clinic, there's going to be a lot of work, right? But I would say, I mean, those same changes at the border, those asylum laws and the difficulties do impact the children crossing. The attitudes of the ICE enforcement officers and the Border Patrol. Those traumas, they will come with the children to Long Island, into the homes and into their future. So all of this has implications. I cannot really speak of the legal, but I can certainly speak of the actual, humane and personal implications that all of these traumas can cause. And so I think that's the impact, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree. Okay, this next question is for Marie. Can you give us your thoughts on the US government's handling of the recent influx of Haitian refugees? I know you touched on this a bit before, but would love to hear from you again on this. Oh, you muted yourself.
You're muted, Mary.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
This is a very tough question, because the moment I receive those questions from you, what I see is 3 generations of Haitians sitting here crying, looking at the news. And I know that it has not left us since that time. When I look at it as someone who believes I was born free in Haiti, came here when I was 16 years old in 1966, the treatment of Haitian is a stark reminder of political and historical antecedents. It inspires a sense of rejection, a sense of punishment, and a lack of sensibility to the people of Haiti. As a whole, we try very hard to be responsible, not only to our people, to our own education, and to persevere wherever we find ourselves. And believe it, what is most disturbing is the relationship that I have studied, that I have witnessed, that I've understood, that the United States holds with the Haitian government. Even the Duvalier regime, all the way to now, the interference in elections, the continued support. Unfortunately, who doesn't know that the last 2 presidents left Haiti with a value of over $600 million, the 2 of them? Who doesn't know the irresponsibility and the derelict in their duties and governance. And even when Jovenel Moïse is assassinated, I would not want to make him a martyr. He was really not really different from what he was doing in Haiti. So this relationship, to me, the corruption is evident, the lack of responsibility is evident. And I ask whenever I meet a congressperson, why is it that we don't hold this government accountable? I'm a Haitian American. I believe in the democracy that we've pushed, but the application of this democracy fails when it comes to the Haitian people. So why do we continue to do it? In short, the American government has, in its application of law, be it immigration or be it inside Haiti, has no respect for the dignity of the Haitian people. And they have demonstrated in so many ways since the occupation in Haiti in 1914 until now. It continues to be repetitive. And we need to look to the whole world if we're really looking at inclusion and diversion and capacity for us to accept one another. We need to have the United States, we need to put a fire on the butt to change its policies. Seriously, it is so painful to live and to try to be as responsible as possible and to see it undermined and dilapidated by the government that holds of the highest so-called responsibility for world unity and assign every declaration and every standard that the UN has brought forth in terms of diversity, acceptance, and dignity. We cannot support it anymore.
Thank you, Marie. Thank you for that thoughtful response.
Yeah.
This next question is for Sister Eileen. From the legal perspective, what do you think we could do to improve the asylum application system?
I think that I'm going to go beyond the legal system to begin with, because I think there has been a criminalization of immigrants who are crossing the border just to escape terrible persecution and to protect themselves and their family. It didn't just begin with the Trump administration, but it certainly was enhanced by his rhetoric regarding the immigrants who are crossing the border. But I think that there's a misunderstanding in the eyes of the public as they see the Border Patrol arresting people. It looks like they're arresting people. Many of these people have been turning themselves over to the Border Patrol because they want to apply for an asylum. But the presentation in the media very often and in the rhetoric gives a misinterpretation and lacks the compassion that we ought to have. I mean, these are Americans. We're from the United States. They're from America. They're from Central America, South America. We don't own America. So they're coming to another part. They're coming to the United States looking for some relief. So we have right now, I think, 26,000 people in immigration jails in the United States, many of whom, I think 20,000 of whom, never had a criminal record. So that the treatment, I know it's not the application process per se, but the treatment of folks who are just looking to escape persecution has to change. And we have to look through the media and keep compassion in our hearts and our eyes and our minds with regard to these folks. One thing that has to stop is these credible fear interviews at the border, where people are, after they've been months traveling from one country to another, often put in detention, and then they just, it's not even a trial, they don't present evidence or anything. Somebody determines whether or not they ought to be able to stay to present a political asylum application. And they're expected on the spot without any documentation or anything else, traumatized from the journey, from the experience of being put in detention, to make a case for themselves as to why they should stay and be able to litigate an asylum. That has to stop. It's inhumane. It's not due process. It goes against everything that the law tells them that they're entitled to, and it should shame us.
Thank you, Eileen. Thank you for those very profound words. We are going to go to our final question for the panel, and then we are going to go to our Q&A, which will be pretty short. So our final question is for all of our panel speakers, including Pat Young. And I would love if everyone can keep this one brief. You've all been wonderful. You've all been staying under time. But if you could make one change to our immigration system to make it more equitable and just, what would it be? Pat, is it okay if we start with you?
Sure. I mean, before I say what I'd change, I'd just let folks know I did drop a link into the chat, which will take you to a way to send a message to Senator Schumer. We have about 2 weeks left to try to get a path to citizenship for the undocumented into the reconciliation bill. But the change that I would make to the asylum system is that everyone should have the right to an attorney. It's ridiculous that people can spend time in jail, can have cases tried that could lead to them losing their lives. People have been deported and then murdered when they've been sent back to their countries and not even have the right to a lawyer. We give that to people who are even facing 6 months jail in the United States, and yet many refugees spend months and even years in jail awaiting their hearings, and then they don't have any right to an attorney. So that's what I would change. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Marie?
I think that I would think that a consideration is that we can treat everyone equally. It is so clear that people are treated unequally and that there are some prioritized than others. So having an attorney, as Pat said, would support that, and also having clearer processes that everyone can understand.
Thank you, Marie. Angel?
I mean, even more than law itself, I would say that our first priority must be changing public discourse, rhetoric, right? And just say that we're welcoming people, right? To just be that country again. And I mean, we can both open our doors to immigrants, and also safeguard ourselves from COVID and, any other situation. So that's the first thing I would change.
Thank you. And Sister Eileen?
I would make the immigration judges, Article 3 judges, meaning independent. Right now, they're employees of the Executive Office of Immigration Review. So when a person goes in for a hearing with or without an attorney, the judge and the prosecutor who's trying to send them home are being paid by the same person. And the same person is kind of governing both of their positions, how many cases they should be hearing, et cetera. So it's a very unfair process from the point of view of the person who's supposed to be an independent judge of the facts that are being put before them.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank all of you for all of your really thoughtful and insightful responses throughout the whole panel. I think it was important to kind of end on talking about the things that need improvement and figuring out ways to imagine bigger, more equitable, bigger and brighter systems for our immigrant friends. So with that, I think I'm going to transition into the Q&A. We're only going to have time for 2 questions, unfortunately. So we're going to take the first 2 that were sent our way. So the first one, it's a pretty simple question, and I'm actually going to pose it to Pat. And it is, what is Title 42?
I'm going to let Angel talk about that.
Okay.
I think the attorney didn't really need to explain that, but I would, my understanding of what I've been reading and what I've been seeing is that it's an archaic rule that gives the president the opportunity to have full control of crossings and immigration. So the way Trump used it was now just denying people from a right to, you know, a court hearing, right? And also, you know, I mean, the only exception to that, my understanding is the unaccompanied minors, right? But other than that, you know, people don't have the right to a court hearing, and also don't even have the right to to appeal to the decision of their deportation, and it's because of the crisis of COVID-19, right? It gives, and I think it's a rule that was used back in the early 1900s when we were having the crisis also with the flu pandemic. So correct me, Pat, if I'm wrong.
That's why I threw it to you. I figured you could answer it much more concisely than I could.
Thank you for that.
Thank you both. And the final question, sorry, loud car. The final question is for Sister Eileen. So can you explain a little bit more about how exactly the current and past administrations have been changing rules for those seeking asylum in the southern border in order to reduce the number of people they are required to allow asylum?
Well, I think the obvious was the Trump administration's NPP, where people couldn't even get in, that they were being detained in Mexico. And I mean, I think that was a violation of United States law as well as international law, very, very clearly. So, I mean, that in itself is a way that is controlling the number of people who are there. We don't know how many people just gave up and went back, and as Angel said before, might have been killed when they went back to their own country. And I think in the present administration is still using Title 42, the public health excuse for limiting the number of people who can get in, although I think it has relieved to a certain extent the number of people, and families are not being separated, at least at the present time. But as Marie has alluded to in a number of her remarks, the asylum system in our country, not just in the past two administrations, but has been very, very discriminatory, going back to even before 80. I mean, I can remember us advocating for when they had the lottery system, they were first asking for pictures being put on it. The applicant for the lottery had to, which is underserved countries that don't have the number of admissions that they would be allowed. And we got the feeling that the pictures were being scrutinized on the basis of color, so that Anglo-Saxon people had a much better chance of getting in than any of the people of color. So that's the state that we're in right now, and hopefully that we'd all like to change.
Thank you so much, Eileen. So with that, we're going to close the evening by again sharing our gratitude for all of our speakers and attendees. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. We're really looking forward to hosting more Long Island Immigration Clinic events in the upcoming months and appreciate all of your support. You can look out for a follow-up email tomorrow from us with action items that you can do to advocate for our immigrant friends that are based on right on the conversation that we had tonight. And if you're not doing so already, make sure to follow us on all of our social media channels on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Great. Have a great one. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, panelists.
Thanks a lot.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Yes, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marie, for stepping in at the last minute.